गुड आफ्टरनून एवरीवन. एज ऑफ नाउ आप सब लोग अभी म्यूट पे हो. So once we're done with the talking, and you have any questions to ask, you can write in the chat box or just raise your hand. I'll unmute um, you, and we'll be starting in next 5 minutes. I'm just waiting for everyone to join in. Mm, just 5 to 7 more minutes, and then we can hop on to the masterclass. Okay, so we have 37 participants as of now, and more are joining. So I guess we'll start. And just to let you know, I'm no expert in this specific domain or anything. I just read a Stanford Communication Journal about podcasting. And since I've been doing this for a while now, so I thought I'll share what I've experienced and what I know after doing 40 or 50 plus podcasts. And also, we're live on YouTube now. So I guess that's perfect. Sab theek hai. Cool. We also have people from the MKR team. So just in case there's any technical glitch, they'll be handling the masterclass. So we're good to go. Okay. So also, if you guys are comfortable, can you please turn on your videos? जो भी comfortable है, and tell me something. Would that be fine if I'll be bilingual and use English and Hindi both? If there's someone not comfortable with Hindi, they can write it in the chat box, and I'll just stick to English. Okay, bilingual is fine. I guess we'll proceed then. I am not okay. Okay, Kirtana. Okay, I guess I'll stick to English then. Okay, Kirtana. No worries. ठीक है. So I'll just quickly tell what I'll be covering in the masterclass and what I will be not. So for some couple of things that I'll be covering is how to pitch a guest, how to prepare the perfect outline, how to tackle the anxiety. I'll just give a few tips and tricks to deal with that, and how to decide the flow, how to introduce a guest on the podcast. And something that I won't be covering is the technical aspect, how to monetize your podcast, how to expand the reach. Yes, I'll not be covering. I'll be focusing more on the communication aspect, as in how do you go about it, how do you decide the flow, how do you get the listeners to sit there for good 30 to 40 minutes and listen to what you are speaking in that time frame. So before starting, I'll just tell you that I was taught while I was practicing public speaking and communication, I was taught the 7 C's of communication, which actually I believe now that I'm into podcasting do not really apply. As in, the 7 C's were clarity, being concise, being correct, being complete, being considerate, being concrete, and courtesy. So I believe while we're podcasting, we do have to improvise a bit. So for being concise and being correct doesn't always apply in what we're doing then. So I'll start with why you should start a podcast. As in, you guys are now here, so I believe you just once thought of starting a podcast. So whether it's to build a brand or it's to just build a personal brand, talking about something, talking about something you are enthusiastic and getting a dialogue out there, and someone's asking if I'm recording and sharing the link. Well, we're live on YouTube, so you can also watch the masterclass after we're done on YouTube. So we'll keep that recording on YouTube. YouTube. The voice is breaking. Is my voice fine? Or okay, perfect. Thank you, Anshul. Okay. So if you're just trying to get a dialogue out there, and if you're just passionate about something, you want to talk about something, and or you just like talking to new people, so I'll start with how to pitch a guest. So you don't have to. While I talk to people about podcasting, there's this common misconception which I hear all the time. It's about अरे मेरे podcast पे I don't have industry leaders and industry experts out there to come on my podcast, and I don't um, know them. I don't have contacts with them. How do I start? Is my voice fine? Just making sure again, is my voice fine? Or is there a problem at my end? It is fine. Thank you so much. ठीक है. So the common misconception ये है कि यार I don't have industry experts to come on my podcast. How do I even start? If I just get people to just talk about some specific things, space and psychology, economics, so I won't be driving audience, and which is a total complete bullshit, because you just have to provide value to the audience. Just get people to make meaningful conversation. फिर बेशक it's your friend, it's your any your professor from your college, any friend, or even someone who's just read a research journal. Because I am here because I started reading this Stanford Communication Journal, and so I started doing this. So it is absolutely bullshit. I don't have contacts. Who will come to my podcast and who will be the guest? How will I drive audience? So fair. If you have any friend who you can make a deep conversation with, who you can talk about things he is passionate about or she is passionate about, and you yourself is you yourself there's some topic you want to talk about. Even for the first quite a few episodes, you can just go about yourself, talk whatever you feel like. It is not mandatory to have a guest. Talk about what you've read, what drives you. And while pitching a guest, something you need to keep in mind is don't throw what you achieved or what you're doing on them, because they won't give a flying fuck about तुम क्या कर रहे हो, तुम क्या नहीं कर रहे. Something which will get them to hear to you is tell them what drives you, tell them what you are aiming through the podcast. For example, sir or ma'am, I am just a beginner, and through the podcast this is my aim, and this is what I'll be focusing on, and this is what drives me, and this is why I am getting you on my podcast, because I feel this is a value or a topic that resonates with both of us. So that is the key. If you'll just tell them, okay, so I'm studying this is from here, and these are my achievements, and I'm starting a podcast, I would love you to be there, they won't give a flying fuck. Trust me, I've prepared a standard pitch for every guest. मैं सबको same pitch check देती थी, and they would just read my message and just ignore the shit out of that. So फिर The key is कि just personalize what resonates with you and what resonates with them. So that was about how to pitch a guest. Starting के episodes में, if you think you're not comfortable with getting a guest or getting a leader or expert on your podcast as a guest, just talk to a friend, just talk to someone who is very passionate talking about something. Example dena please if possible. Example about for I'll just give you an example. Priyanshu, there's no sample pitch, so it's absolutely according to what you want to talk about to the guest. For example, I just tell you something. While I was starting to get into podcasting and I had recorded a couple of episodes, so I just मेरे को जो भी अच्छा लगता था, जो भी मुझे अपीलिंग लगता था ना कि wow, this guy has done so much and been in industry for quite a long time. I used to message them और मेरी एक सिर्फ सैम्पल पिच होती थी जो मैं सबको चेप देती थी कि सर आई एम दिस आई एम स्टार्टिंग अ पॉडकास्ट एंड और मैं पिछले उसके लिंक्स भेज देती थी सर this other links of the podcast I've done before. So unless and until you don't give them a concrete reason why they should be on your podcast, so तब तक वो नहीं आएंगे, तब तक they won't give a shit. So you have to personalize a pitch. There is no perfect pitch. There is no standard pitch um, to get a guest to your podcast. And then how do you form an outline? For example, what I do is a, before even before even asking them to be on my podcast to be the guest, I just do a quick as in session where I get to know them. I just do a quick call with them. So उससे मुझे भी idea हो जाता है is this person even perfect for getting on a podcast, because there are a lot of people out there who've done something, who've accomplished something, but they aren't really good public speakers. So they cannot get you audience. So that is what you have to decide at your end. Ke, although this person has been in industry, although this person has achieved a lot, but is this person the right person to get on the podcast? Would this person be able to drive audience? Because truth be told, लोग उन्हीं को सुनते हैं जो उन्हें appealing लगते हैं, और जो the ones who are good public speakers. What is a podcast? How to I'll just I will just address all these questions at the end once I'm done with all of my speaking. So you can keep on writing the questions, but I'll have to address them towards the end. Thank you. तो फिर हाँ, अब now it comes how to form an outline. So an out, but there is no perfect outline. A mistake I used to make while I was getting into this कि I had standard questions होते थे मेरे. I have designed a few standard questions for the starting and for the end. कि sir, just hopping into a bit nostalgic feel, tell me about your childhood. Or फिर last में sir, what is the best advice that you've got? And something which I realized is these standard questions cannot drive your audience, cannot drive your audience for a very long time. 2 3 4 episodes लोग सुनेंगे, and after that they'll just know कि इसको ये पूछना है. You'll become very predictable. What I mean by that is, so now focusing on the person's personal life and achievements is something that is very subjective. Subjective in the sense that, for example, people don't really want to know about your personal life or about your achievements. They want to know how you can add value to their lives, how you can get them insights, how you can get them information that they cannot get on Google. So फिर, and by very subjective I mean is some people have life worth talking about. I mean, I'm not saying um, not pointing out anyone's achievements as worthless, but something that will drive audience. कई लोगों की होती है life motivation and inspiration. You can dig out from them, and not everyone is a public speaker or a very efficient speaker to let you know about them in a very interesting manner. So what we often do is we dive into the personal life so deep, and I used to talk about for the personal life and achievements because that was something that spoke to me, but not my audience. So I used to go about talking with them for good 15 to 20 minutes, and starting का उसमें waste हो जाता था, and by then the listener had already exited the app. नहीं सुनना होता था उनको मेरा podcast. So that is very subjective क्योंकि I know how technology has been fucking up with our attention span, and no one is there sitting to listen about क्या थी personal life, कहाँ से graduate हुए, and where was the peak of the personal life or career. So that was it. And the key to frame an outline, while you do frame an outline for specific speaker, but the key for me has always been to improvise. And to improvise, as in, we all are humans, no one wakes up in the morning and writes a script for the day. So sometimes the purpose for me while I was in the podcast was to get lost on purpose. And if you're stuck at some point, just know that just be very obvious. There's this very common saying in the world of improv is dare to be dull. Don't be so driven to make everything interesting. Don't be so driven to make everything sound very appealing to everyone. Just be yourself. And like I said, if you're stuck somewhere, just be obvious, because being obvious is something almost everyone can relate to. So this was मैं हर podcast के लिए सोचती थी what is the new thing I can ask, what is the thing that can be add spice to the podcast. But something I've realized is go with the flow. While you do frame an outline, don't be so stick to that कि you're not able to improvise. And so there's also, while I was learning and knowing more about communication and public speaking, there was also a thing which I came across um, which said fail fail gracefully. So this was another very common saying, because once you do that, once you try out, once you do everything in your power, the next time you go on stage, the next time you hop onto a podcast, you'll be unstoppable. So that was what spoke to me. And another thing is, it is not about the guest every time. For example, तुमने ये सोचा कि I've invited a guest, but how do I make it all about him? How do I extract the most valuable information or most valuable output out of the guest? So have something in it for you. Be uh, be a bit self-driven, and be a bit just have something in it for you. Because while you exit out of the podcast, while you're done recording, you should have a takeaway you got from that podcast. You should have some value at the end जो तुम अपने साथ लेके जाओ, not just for the listeners but for yourself. So after recording a considerable number of podcasts, उसके बाद मुझे realize हुआ कि while it is also about the audience, but if I am not learning anything in the process, it's all useless for me. तो हर पॉडकास्ट के बाद आई मेड श्योर कि आई विल टेक अवे समथिंग विद मी, आई विल learn something from the guest. And also, it's definitely about wowing the audience, but don't forget to get your purpose. Don't just get lost in that. So be able to choose for yourself. And while if, for example, it's not just about making it more like an interview, it's about having a seamless conversation in a way. When the guest is finished answering, when the guest is finished speaking, have a time for yourself where you share what you've learned, how you think about the same topic. Have time for you where you speak, not just the guest. And while I'm saying have time for you to speak, I also strongly recommend to listen. Don't be so driven to give your opinions every time. Now, this might seem a bit contrasting, but it is very crucial to listen what um, what the guest is saying, because only after that you can give your opinions, tell them how you feel, tell a story, narrate a story about the same topic. And I also got this asked in another masterclass, "Hey, Mishika, what do you do if the guest is going on speaking and speaking, and you've already extended the length of the podcast, and how do you tell him to stop, basically?" So my very simple answer would be, if the guest is speaking something very personal, if the guest is narrating a personal incident, I would prefer not to interrupt the guest. Because then there's this psychology that comes into play, and आगे के podcast का जो पूरा flow होता है वो खराब हो जाता है. So edit it at the end. उसके लिए you have the editing tools available all over there. So edit it at the end, but don't interrupt by when they're speaking, when they're narrating, and specifically a personal incident that speaks to them, that resonates with them. And क्योंकि listeners के दिमाग में it's obviously the echo you need, echo and curiosity. How the curiosity comes into play is basically, for example, I recorded a podcast in which I was very successfully able to leave the echo and curiosity in the minds of listeners. So how the curiosity comes into play is, जैसे ही तुम्हारा next podcast आएगा, they'll straight away hop onto that. And as a perspective of the guest, they would want to know more about you after the podcast. Oh, this is what drives you. Let's talk about ABC or XYZ after the podcast. So you'll not only be recording meaningful conversations which will make an impact, you'll also be um, you'll also be making connections that will last forever. So that is the key for me. And then it comes to, how do you introduce the guest to your podcast? For example, you have the president of ABC company. So you don't hop on just telling the achievements. Oh, we have um, Mr. Anil with us, who is the president of this. Audience doesn't give a shit. ठीक है? उनको चाहिए कि what you'll be talking in the next 30 to 40 minutes. Tell them something that you're going to talk about in the next 30 to 40 minutes. It's about hitting the nail. अगर तुम उनको इस इंट्रोडक्शन के पार्ट में, यू विल बी एबल टू मेक देम सिट एंड लिसन टू योर पॉडकास्ट. सो दैट व्हाइल यू इंट्रोड्यूस योर गेस्ट, दैट इज द डिसाइडिंग फैक्टर फॉर योर पॉडकास्ट कि लोग बैठ के अगले 30 मिनट या 1 घंटे के लिए सुनेंगे या नहीं. So if you're talking about a specific experience, give the listeners a brief background of that in the introduction. How in the next 30 to 40 minutes do you want the audience to perceive your conversation and what to expect from your conversation. Guest की achievements और list करने से कोई फायदा नहीं है, because it's the listeners always make sure कि वो इसीलिए बैठ के सुने ताकि उनको कुछ insights मिले, पॉडकास्ट के एंड में वो कुछ अपने साथ लेके जा सकें, या फिर कुछ ऐसा एक्सपीरियंस which gives them goosebumps or pleasure or anything. तो it's not about कहाँ काम करता है गेस्ट और क्या करता है. So just hit the nail right. Just grab the audience in the while you're introducing the guest. And something I'm sure which all of us faces, anxiety. Um, Irrespective of how many times we've done public speaking, irrespective of the MUNs we've done, irrespective of the mock parliaments we all have done, we face anxiety, and we go all sweaty and blushy while we're talking on a podcast. So, and this is very evolutionary. This is a very humanly thing to do. You cannot completely cut out anxiety. There's no magic formula out there जिससे तुम anxious नहीं होगे. So while something you can do is um, manage the anxiety in a way that it doesn't manage you. So what I mean by managing the anxiety is there's two ways to managing anxiety: managing the symptoms and managing the sources. So, this obviously boils down to two things, like I said. And while I was reading the communication journal, so I noted down a couple of things which I've ever since applied, and it absolutely works for me. This might seem as a little tip and trick session, but it is totally useful for me. So if you're someone who goes very sweaty at the starting of or in the mid of a session while you're talking to someone, and you go very blushy and red, so try holding a cold water bottle before you begin and hop onto the podcast. And if you shake a lot, if for example, this is definitely what I do, if you shake a lot, try using broad hand movements or gestures. So it gives the adrenaline a place to go. So that is what you do. And just channelize all your energy into your hand movements and gestures. So you don't go all shaky and mess up things. And suppose you're recording a long podcast that is say 40 minutes to 60 minutes or more, and your mouth goes dry in between. So what you can do is just chew a gum before the podcast, obviously, and drink something hot. So it avoids your mouth going dry and you blabbering shit in between. So the most obvious trick is to take deep breaths. It calms you down. It channelizes all the energy going haywire. and it slows the heart rate and it relaxes you basically. And something which I think is also scary is the fear of future and the unknown. For example, while I'm in the podcast, I often catch myself thinking about, okay, now I am recording the podcast. I am giving my best. I am just all in. But what if it doesn't speak to the audience? What if it turns out to be pathetic? ये होता है. What if this is a topic we're talking about? No one is interested in. So the key is to be present oriented, and obviously it doesn't uh, is it is isn't easy as it sounds being present oriented. So how you can do that is by just in the beginning of the podcast, listen to your Eminem or NF playlist and say tongue twisters. As crazy and silly as it might sound, I always do this when I'm going to give an exam, because believe it or not, you cannot say a tongue twister if you're not present in the moment. And also, something I was too skeptical to share is I often do this backward counting, because that is even something you cannot do if you're not present in the moment. So, this is what I do to just be present oriented, and just to get rid of the fear that I've been dealing with in starting. And now there's also like I've been asked this question a lot in the previous masterclass that I've spoken to, and which is the fear of blanking out. Okay, what if I prepared the pitch? What if I'm also ready to improvise? But what if I get all blanked out and I'm not able to remember anything at the moment? For example, just after a guest is done answering to a question that I asked, उसके बाद मुझे कुछ याद नहीं आ रहा है, and there's this awkward silence between the two of us. So what do I do then? So the key is to map out your content. And while not, I'm not telling you to memorize each and every question or each and every part of the outline that you frame, but map out your content. उसको divide कर दो in sections. Keep in mind कि this is what the question is about. And because sometimes in situations like this, memorizing can actually work against you, and you obviously cannot memorize if you're holding podcasts with a lot of guests. Things tend to get messy. So just keep a back pocket question. By a back pocket question, I mean a question which is valid in every situation. And while you throw the back pocket question at them, something you can do is just recollect your thoughts while the guest is answering to the back pocket question, and buy yourself some time. So that is the trick. Throw the back pocket question, buy yourself some time, and just repeat in your mind what you said um, in the previous question. So that way you'll be able to just focus on what the next question was, and you'll able to recollect that in your mind. So that was how I deal with anxiety and all, being all sweaty and blushy. So that's what I do. And I'll just hop onto the questions real quick, because I believe we've been getting a lot of questions in the chat box. Yes, we do. What is a podcast? How to create a link for the podcast? What is it used for apart from having guests? So a podcast is basically people talking in a way that it provides you insights, it gives you value. So there can be podcasts, there's podcast about every field, every domain. For example, people talking about sustainable development goals, people talking about economy, people talking about their personal experiences, people talking about what they faced, what their life has been like. So that is a podcast. And podcast, while is not only a way to talk about experiences and the ongoing topics, podcast also helps brand grow in a way that it maximizes their reach. And brands can actually provide insightful values to their customers. And can you how to create a link for the podcast? So there's this for all the beginners who are just planning to record their first or second podcast and just want to try it out for a bit. There's this app called Anchor. So for Anchor has totally revolutionized the way people think of podcasts. You don't need any fancy equipment or anything like that. You just need to download that app, record an episode of you speaking, and add background music, cut it, edit it, whatever. So That is how you can actually hop on to record your first podcast. Try it out for yourself. Usko publish mat karna. Just know how you can do on podcast, and just practice for a while until you feel you are ready to hop on and publish the podcast. Now, what is it used for? Like I said, it is used for adding insightful values and just letting the conversation out, letting the dialogue out. Um, how do you approach the potential guest? Directly on LinkedIn or through managers? Do managers have a specific ask in terms of the pitch? Okay. So, for example, I have been doing it for Mitti ke Rang. So we do have people who reach out to the guest, but for when I was individually planning to launch my podcast, I would personally reach out to guests. And for example, agar if you're not doing it for a brand or a company, you do not need to have people who reach out for you, because when you reach out to the guest yourself, there's a personal touch to it. And obviously you cannot have people reaching out for you. Like I said, um, there is no perfect pitch. You'll have to customize it. You'll have to decide for yourself what how do you create value for the guest while after inviting them, since the people you look up to are few years ahead of us generally, and get them engaged into podcasting. What do you do? Is it not okay? So how do I create value for the guest? That is actually a very valid point. Ki why would someone hop onto my podcast? Why would someone agree to my request? So please be a guest on my podcast. And obviously, since the people we look up to and are a few years ahead in us of generation, I believe we're talking about here. So um, this is my personal experience, and I'm speaking for myself here. What I've noticed is when you approach people, they're actually looking for a platform to get their voice out. So and I've heard a lot of speakers telling me at the end, okay, Mishika, thank you. This was actually a moment where we could introspect and sit and think about it. So creating value for the guest in terms of they get to introspect, they get to have their dialogue out in the public. So every trust me, everyone is looking for a platform to talk, platform to communicate, platform to get their dialogue out, and the platform to create an impact. So that is how you do it for the guest. Give them a platform and give them a basically um, give them a platform to speak and to interact with the guests. While in a podcast, if your mind gets empty, what do you do at that time? Like I said, map out the content and have a back pocket question. So back pocket question ऐसा होना चाहिए which can be relevant in every situation. So prepare a back pocket question according to who your guest is, and that should be the last priority. Kyuki, like I said, there's another way of tackling if your mind gets empty. Think about what you said previously. So what the last question was, and then try recollecting your thoughts. And this is usually what works for me. I repeat the last question in my head, and then I automatically get what the next question was. And if in the rarest of the rare case I get completely blanked out, I throw the back pocket question at them. So जब तक वो guest answers that, जब तक the guest thinks about that, I can collect my thoughts and move ahead. Which podcast platform? How to market podcast? Which podcast platform good to start? Like I said, Anchor, which has completely revolutionized the way we think of podcasts. That is how I started podcasting, and it is very simple. You just have to record yourself talking and publish it or don't publish it. It's totally up to you. And you can actually link all your Spotify accounts, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, to that, and you won't have to um, publish it separately or on the platform. Just link all your other accounts to Anchor, and it will be, once you publish it on Anchor, it will be available everywhere. That means we should not say anything person incidents about me to the guest. I'm not sure, Jyoti, what you mean by that. What are some of the ways to hook the audience? Like I said, the audience is not looking for the audience is not looking for something um, about the which is very guest specific. For example, what they have accomplished, where do they work, what have their positions been. But the audience is looking for themselves. उनको खुद के लिए चाहिए. They don't give a shit about you. They don't give a shit about your guest. दैट इज द फैक्ट है. तो उनको ऐसे कुछ इंसाइट चाहिए, समथिंग through which they can get their value and they can get their dose of insulin. So फिर just talk about experiences which make sense to the audience. Just talk about topics which can provide insights to the audience. Will this, yes, this session will be there on YouTube, Aditya. You can watch it. We'll keep that on YouTube. There's no deleting there. Podcast is one of the best way to market your business and products and your services. So how could we make our podcast stand out? For example, if you are recording the first episode, just go about it. Just have something in it for you. Like I said, if you are planning to market a product, I would say, how could we market? How could we make a podcast stand out? So there's two dimensions. Either you're working for a brand and you're just making people aware of the brand through the podcast, and if you're doing it for yourself and your personal branding. So while you work for a brand, it is very specific to what kind of conversation is the company or the venture asking you to make. But when you're doing it for yourself, like I said, have something in it for you. And how do you make your podcast stand out? हर पॉडकास्ट के एंड में द लिसनर शुड हैव अ वैल्यू दे टेकिंग अवे विद देम. You shouldn't be just senselessly blabbering out things. Um, how do you contact the resource person or the guest? Do you, okay, I answered that. Please give an example of a back pocket question. Okay, so for example, I am talking about to a CSR professional, CSR being corporate social responsibility, and we're talking about um, how the CSR plays a role in uplifting the society as a whole. So my back pocket question in this case would be, how does the CSR align with the Sustainable Development Goals? So that would my back pocket question would be. So basically back pocket question would be जो तुम कभी भी पूछ सको irrespective of the conversation you're having then. So it should be related to the topic and related to the topic in a way कि जब तुम पूछो it doesn't look very out of the box और अरे अचानक से एक question कहाँ से आ गया. It should resonate with the whole conversation, with the whole flow you're having with the guest. How is a podcast different from an interview? Oh, lovely. So, basically, an interview is you asking questions to a person. And while a podcast is both of you having the introduction, while a podcast is a seamless conversation. So, I did make that huge mistake of in first, I believe, 10 episodes, which was a lot. I just threw questions at the guests. So, what happened was the it wasn't a podcast, it was just an interview. And this was something I realized when people started pointing out, Nishika, you're making it look like an interview while you're holding a podcast, you're organizing a podcast, it should be like a seamless conversation. And then I realized, oh yes, it is not about just the experience of the guest, it is also my experiences and what I think on that topic we're talking about. So that is a podcast. There should be a seamless conversation between you and the guest. Can you tell me how to make a link of the podcast practically? Like I said, Anchor, once you publish your podcast, there will be a link for you to share. Just share that, record yourself, publish it on Anchor, make a thumbnail, make a title, make a description for your podcast, and you'll have the link right on the app to share. For personal brand, should we go ahead and present a solo podcast, or should we invite guests as well? So a podcast, you can absolutely go solo. You can absolutely, if you are able to provide information to the listeners all by yourself, and you don't think there's any need to get any guests to your podcast, you can definitely go solo. In fact, going solo, I believe, gives you a wider perspective, because then it is just you talking, and then you actually introspect के क्या बात करनी चाहिए, because 30 minutes or 20 minutes, even 15 minutes just speaking all by yourself is a long time. And for me it was personally कि ठीक है, एक दो episodes में I can go solo, but then my mind gets too exhausted too. And And at the end, I do need somebody else's opinion on on a couple of things that we're talking about. I do need a different perspective, so that is why I chose to get on guests. And for a lot of episodes, 30 to 40, that was too much for me to go on to go on talking and talking. So, and while you can absolutely go solo, if you feel you can do that, go for it. How to modulate voice for podcast? So this Deepti, this is a very valid question, because I feel um, if you're starting, you can just go on and talk in a very dull tone. So for the key to modulate your voice is just by practicing. For me, it was practicing in front of the mirror. So practice in front of the mirror, revise your outline by yourself, and give the outline to the guest. Okay, so the key is the, I don't know if many of you know about this. We do give the guests uh, outline in advance. So, sir, this is the outline. हम ये बात करेंगे podcast पे. These are the questions that we will ask you. And so even they can have a perspective, and they can prepare their answers accordingly. So be prepared. What your best memory of podcast so far? My best memory would be um, when I got Manish Tyagi on podcast. So Sir Manish Tyagi, he's an amazing person. He's actually a stand-up comedian, and that podcast was so seamless. Was It was just a conversation where Manish sir was just narrating jokes to me, and it was the best one so far. Podcasting is one of the best way to market. So okay, stand out. How could you share and recommend the gear that you personally use, not too expensive but good quality? Okay, so how I record podcast is I record it on Zoom. I Because obviously I cannot meet them, so I've completely moved online, and we record it on Zoom. So once you record the podcast on Zoom, you get a video recording and an audio recording. So you can edit that out accordingly. And I believe I use a JBL ka small mic that is available on Amazon, and if not mic, I also use JBL ke these HD high definition earphones. These are also pretty comfortable, and um, like you guys can judge for yourself. I don't think there's any disturbance in the audio or something. So this one's perfect to go. If you're not willing to invest a lot in the Rode mic or everything for the podcast. Mm-mm-mm. What if we go on asking a direct question? May not be may not be rude asking them, but what if it ends up rude on their side? They don't like it. Acha. So I did encounter this on my end. So we had this guest from the UN, and while I was asking about the dominance of the very powerful P5, so that is why I always recommend to give the guest an insight of what you're going to ask, what you're going to question them in the podcast beforehand, because there are questions that can make someone uncomfortable. So don't directly just bomb them with a uncomfortable question and the question they cannot answer while they're in a public domain. Give them a brief introduction and an idea of the outline beforehand. So I often tell them, sir or ma'am, you can edit or omit it accordingly. Just write to them and I'll make the changes. How to catch audience and marketing? Provide value and insights. It said this is how you catch audience. How do we make the guests relatable enough? Okay, so to make the guests relatable, you have to first figure out what type of audience are you looking at. What type of audience do you want to listen to your podcast? If there are students, do it accordingly. Invite guests which make sense to the students, and invite mentors. And if you're someone a CSR professional, get people who can talk about sustainability. Get people who can talk about the CSR experiences or the CSR projects. So figure out what audience you're talking to and what audience you want to provide value to. Is scripting necessary before recording, or it should be random? Um, it can be random. It is absolutely up to you. If you think you can go about it without scripting or without making an outline beforehand, and स्क्रिप्टिंग डजंट नेसेसरीली मीन्स कि मैं सारे क्वेश्चंस उनको बताऊं कि सब मैम ये मैं ये पूछने वाली और मैं वही पूछ के चुप हो जाऊंगी. सो जस्ट मैप आउट द कंटेंट, मैप आउट कि तुम्हें किस चीज़ों के बारे में बात करनी है, मैप आउट द टॉपिक्स दैट यू विल बी टॉकिंग अबाउट. जस्ट पॉइंटर्स वुड ऑल्सो बी गुड because that helps you to not get stuck. If you'll be random, you can obviously get a conversation, but you cannot always make sure you can make a meaningful conversation while you're random. You might get lost in the process. How would you define success of a podcast? So to me, success of a podcast is absolutely if people come up and tell you, Mishika, yes, this helped me and this was amazing, and this helped me in this way, this provided me value. So that is how I define success of a podcast. And for someone who wants to build a personal brand in a very particular domain, would you suggest sticking to and making podcasts very general and not being very selective while investing? Let's say I want to start a UI design podcast, and it might be into this subcategory of design. What you suggest I go for? And getting professional in subdomain with good communication skill makes it even narrow and and harder. Okay, so Priyanshu, okay, if you're looking to build a personal brand, I suggest, and if you also consider, I'm I'll give an example. If I'm particularly new in a field or a domain and I don't have many connections or guests to talk about, get your friends who are in the same field. Talk amongst yourself, talk about their experiences, talk about why you selected this domain, what speaks out to you, talk about the future of this domain. So that is how I would suggest starting for a podcast. And get and while you do that, so you also provide insights and you also figure out ways for yourself. So, and after you're done talking about that amongst yourself, get say connect to industry leaders on LinkedIn or whatever your platform is, and tell them, sir, this is my podcast. We are students who are new to this domain, and we are students who are just looking out for people to talk about this, and this has been our journey so far. So then ask them if they would be interested in talking about the same to you. Can this session be called as a podcast? No, definitely not, because this is just me speaking and blabbering out stuff, and this is not a conversation that we're making. And this this might be something that provides value, but this is definitely not a podcast. What troubles have you faced while you are live, like due to connection you had to end the podcast and now really started? Any problems you faced and how you dealt with them? So while going online also gives you an edge, it can also be a headache because there are a lot of technical glitches that you'll have to face. Just make sure before the podcast, if you are very skeptical about your internet, do a Zoom call beforehand with your friend or anyone, just to make sure you have the best connection. And just also tell them, like, what I do is make that is actually one reason I give them the outline beforehand. Okay, so if there's any technical glitch, we know how to deal, we know what's next, so we can go about it. And technical glitch, it it is definitely not something you can control. So just be calm in case there's any technical glitch, and you can start over again. If for example I asked a question and uske baad I lost connectivity, so I'll just apologize for that. Sorry, there was a network error on my side. Can I just repeat the question, and can you just answer it again? What is the difference between a webinar and podcast? So I think a podcast, like I said, it's a seamless conversation. It's about providing value, while a webinar is also about providing value. It does not talk about personal experiences, and it is not a seamless conversation. So that is what a podcast is about. Any advices on how to improve post-production aspect, intro music or editing? If you are just beginning, like I said, go with Anchor. It has all the background music feature, intro music or editing. and like I said, I won't be covering technical aspects of the podcast because I am not into that. How do you decide if a guest has value to share? What are the basic criteria that you use? Okay, so there's no basic criteria that I use to pitch guests. I, for example, for example, when you're interested in a field, you know who are the people who can provide you value. For example, if I am interested in CSR, I know there are people out there working in CSR, be it Kanika Pal or be it Nalini. Also, I know who are the people who can provide me value in the specific aspect, in the specific domain. There are people who you look up to. So figure out for yourself who are the people who you look up to, who are the people you think they can provide value. Your podcast link, I will share that on the group. Thank you. Can you touch upon improving audience reach? Call to action for non-business podcast. Ashutosh, can you just elaborate what you mean by that? So those are the questions that I got, and okay. What if the person asks you to give your opinion about anything regarding topics and you have no perfect answer to that and you bluff? Um, yes, definitely. That has happened quite a time with me. And I absolutely do not know how do I. Okay. So what I do is I, for example, if a person asks my opinion that happened with the China and whole TikTok thing, and I didn't really have my opinion ke मैं क्या बोलूं, because if I say that on a podcast or on a public platform, that might come out as rude or that might come out as not very appropriate. So I want to refrain myself. So I would just give a neutral point of view, stating both of the views with that, and I would just be upfront, be जो तुम्हें बोलना है, as in not upfront in making someone very um, disgusted by you. Be upfront ke, and I think this is a platform I definitely cannot give a right answer to, and this is not a topic I can have a very specific point of view. So this is what I think. Give why you tell them why you think like that and why this is not a topic for you to speak. Mm-mm-mm. Any Razia, do we have any other questions from YouTube? No. Okay. Still there is confusion. Wait a minute. Still there is confusion to understand what podcast actually is. Please tell us how podcast is different from webinar, online meeting, online talk, online seminar on a specific topic. Um, I think I wasn't very clear when I said that a podcast is a seamless conversation between you and another person. Or you might have a couple of more people, but it should be a conversation. It should not be an interview or just one person providing value. वेबिनार में क्या होता है, फॉर एग्जाम्पल दिस कैन बी कंसिडर्ड एज अ वेबिनार जिसमें सिर्फ मैं बोल रही हूँ और तुम सब लोग सुन रहे हो, तो फिर दिस this is not a podcast. This is definitely not a podcast where you are speaking and we're having a seamless conversation. Podcast mein the key is to have a seamless conversation, not an interview, not just one person speaking. I work in corporates, in webinars, podcast, seminar. There's always a call to action, a communication leading to certain action like click on link to register, check out. Ashutosh, I am not very sure if I am qualified or educated enough to answer to that. How much research do you do on a topic before getting on a topic with a guest? So definitely, there's a lot to research about topic. There is a lot to research about in what specific domains have the guest been working. For example, if I ask something that doesn't resonate with the guest, तो guest ठीक से answer नहीं दे पाएंगे. So that would be a complete waste of time for me क्योंकि there won't be any perfect insights or value that will be provided to the listeners. So research is needed on what the guest has been doing. Pehle you look at what the guest has been doing. Don't go on researching about the topic just mindlessly. Look into what the guest has been doing. Look into then research about the specific topics and then accordingly frame your questionnaire. And you also can talk to friends about the topic and what questions do they have. Do they have anything they want to ask to the guest, and they want to know about a specific topic. Which are some of the good options to air the podcast apart from our own website? So podcast ke liye there are numerous options for apart from our own YouTube, Facebook, Instagram channel or on own website. There is Anchor, like I said, there is Spotify, there's Google Podcast, there's Castbox, and there are a couple of more podcasts. Just go on to Anchor, and they do have a list of the platforms you can connect to your Anchor. So once you post on Anchor, it will be available through all the platforms. What is the one common myth about your profession or field that you want to debunk? Um, so a myth about my profession would be um, I don't know, but yes, people do confuse something that I am repeating again and again, and people do confuse a podcast and an interview. That is that is also something I confused for myself. Starting me, I was making it more like an interview, but now that I moved ahead with a couple of podcasts being recorded, I realized podcast is not an interview; it is a seamless conversation, like I am pointing out again and again. So that is a myth that I would like to bust here. So, can podcast be called as healthy meeting where all the participants can discuss on a topic, though there is one host, something like a debate as well? Yes, definitely, it can be categorized as a healthy meeting, something like a debate as well. Well, personally, I would refrain from debating on a podcast because in my case, it does get very aggressive. So, yes, but definitely a healthy meeting. Is there a certain platform you follow, pattern you follow in all your podcasts, a common theme? So, like I said, there is no common theme, Deepti, because the guests I have are from different domains, are from various domains spread all across the world. So there is no common theme. While I do have a set questions before I end the podcast. One of them is, what is the best advice you've got? What is the best advice you've got in personal or professional life that you would sum up into a 5 to 7 word presentation title? So that is one question I ask everyone because that is my absolute favorite. Um, what do you do when you realize during an interview that your view opinion doesn't match with a guest at all, and you still want their insight? Stop giving your opinion at that point. First, listen to them. अपना for example, I ask a question, so I want them to answer that first. Okay, so I wouldn't go on telling what I think about it. I would get them to speak in a way, just play with them, just agree to them a bit, and then tell them how your viewpoint is different from them. That is what I do. And obviously, while you're also pointing out your opinions, make sure that you're not doing it in a very disrespectful manner, because you still want the podcast to be a success. You want the podcast um, to be insightful. So don't do that. Don't go on fighting with them. Does duration really matters? Duration I believe does matter, for because like I said, I know how technology has been fucking up with our attention span. So for me, a good duration for a podcast would be 30 to 40 minutes. But your audience might be interested in some specific topic, like having different speakers, different by absolutely might not reach out to so how do you deal with that, and how do you survey what your audience preferences is? So audience preferences depends on the kind of audience you are dealing with. Like I said, um, we at Mitti Ke Rang do it across all domains, but um, if your audience is not wanting to listen to something, not wanting to talk about different domains, or is not interested in going totally haywire, so what you can do is narrow down your audience. Just know before starting a podcast नोट खुद से जानो कि what would your target audience would be. For example, if they're students, I would suggest you get mentors, you get people to talk about their experiences. And if they're professionals, CSR professionals, get them CSR experts. So that is the key. Figure out what you want your audience to be, and then select speakers accordingly, and then select topics accordingly. What do you do if the guest says something that might come out as rude or may offend some of the audience? Edit it out, or like, how do you go about it? Um, if that okay, so if a guest says out something which is very horrible and disgusting, and definitely the audience could get offended. So what I do So what I do, if that's the end, I tell them, okay, sir, this is absolutely not how I think, or how the audience would, which the audience would resonate to. But if I'm in the middle of the podcast and I still have time left with them, मुझे अभी भी उनसे बात करनी है, I want to get insights, I just let it be. बाद में उसको edit out कर दो, there's absolute no problem. And but अगर end है ना podcast का, you know it's ending, तो बोल दो कि sir, this is bullshit what you're speaking, and this is would definitely offend a lot of people. But अगर तुम्हें insights चाहिए, if you want to make the podcast successful, and अगर तुम बीच में हो, so just deal with it more in a very calm manner, and while point out that sir you're wrong, but in a very respectful manner, in a very patient manner, and edit that part out after that. Any good YouTube channel which you can recommend, which has series of podcasts telecasted, so we know samples? Yes, definitely. Thank you, Razia. Promotion, yes. MKR's channel does have a lot of podcasts. Thank you. Please check it out. And apart from them, good podcasters would be, I say, the Ranveer Alabadia podcast. I would say it's definitely one of my favorite. And yes, Joe Rogan, Tim Ferriss. Tim Ferriss and Joe Rogan are my absolute favorite. And there's also one podcast I heard that is about communication that I was talking about in this masterclass. Yes, beer biceps. And I would just give the link to the Stanford communication podcast on the group. I don't specifically remember what was the name of the podcast. How effective have podcasts been to you to create your personal brand? Okay, question from YouTube. So I would say I started getting into podcasts just right after the lockdown began. So thanks to the podcast that I haven't that have kept me sane, and also at the same time have helped me grow a lot, or else I would have completely gone haywire in the lockdown, because I did needed something to channelize my energy to. And in terms of building a personal brand, this has definitely connected me to a lot of people, leading experts from the industry, which I know now be a very would be very valuable networks for me, would be very valuable connection that I can rely as I go about and as I go ahead with my life. Difference between a podcast and an audio file. Audio file. Difference between a podcast and an audio file. Again, the podcast is two people having a seamless conversation, and audio file तो कुछ भी हो सकती है. Just me singing a song, that can also be categorized as an audio file. So podcast, you got to, in a podcast, just keep in mind, you got to provide value to the audience, you got to provide them insights and have a seamless conversation, know about the guests experiences and tell them about your experiences on the same topic. um, so I guess that is it. And is there any more question that I need to address? Please write it in the chat box. Or Razia, do we have any questions from YouTube? No. Okay, perfect. And I guess there are no more questions. Okay. So anyone who wishes to speak can, or give any insight, feedback on how the masterclass has been, please raise your hand. I will Now allow you to unmute yourself and speak. So, yeah, now you can unmute yourself and speak if anyone wishes to speak, or give any feedback, and then we can.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, I
My,
can.
my name is Srikanth. I recently launched my podcast, and this was good insights to hear from live learning experiences. I would encourage if we can have more of these sessions. Also, people who already had their podcast launch, they can also share from their experiences. So create a platform of sorts where people can mutually learn from each other's experiences.
Oh, okay. For that, I'll tell you what we are planning. We are planning to launch a podcast conference, which will have
Super.
podcasters and communicators from all around the world. It will be somewhere in November end, and you will be notified for that. And we will also, like you said, we will also plan out on having some regular sessions, not like masterclass, but a session which many people can interact and give their own point of view. And yes, definitely you can share your podcast link here.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else who wishes to speak?
I actually had a question.
Hi,
Hmm.
Anshul.
Hi. Uh,
Who
see,
knows? अरे अरे
Okay.
so, my question was basically when we start any kind of podcast, or whether it's an interview, we start small. We start taking guests that are not very famous but are experts in their field, right? Now, during that time, you have to understand. We have to make a choice because everybody likes attention. So we have to make a choice which what kind of guests are actually in it because they want to share, or are there to get public spotlight. So how do you make that kind of decision?
Okay, so something that I tell the guest beforehand is, so please refrain from talking about your personal brand or how where you have been working. Just if you're able to provide insights, please do that. And if they continuously, faced a lot of people who are continuously going about talking about their own brand. They're talking about their experiences कि हम अपनी कंपनी में ये करते हैं वो करते हैं. So edit that part out, cut that part out, tell them beforehand कि sir, we are not here to make any kinds of promotion, we're here to give people insights. So be as upfront with them as you can, so ताकि बाद में ये mess up now and you are not then able to get any insight or value out of it. So just avoid that so that all your 30, 40 or 1 hour doesn't get go to the drain. um Anyone else who wishes to speak? I guess we're done then. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here on the masterclass with me. And okay, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I will drop my ID on the group, and on Instagram it is Mishika251. That is it. Vishal. Okay, self defense awareness. I will definitely check out the podcast. You guys have been leaving the links over here, so thank you. I will check them out. And thank you everyone for being here. And it was such a lovely session. Absolutely love the energy. Thank you for the questions.
Sure, man. We talk.
Okay,
We spoke. But see you. Have fun.
see you. Bye.